Some stuff is crude, some stuff is mean. Don't watch if you're under 13. A disclaimer. Watch out! Spaceballs. They're the masters of space. A comedy that always brings a smile to my face. This Mel Brooks classic has aged like fine wine, and will always be a personal favorite of mine. But little did I know that someday soon I would learn of the terrible spin-off cartoon. I never knew how hard this franchise could fall. The Schwartz was not strong with this one at all. Do you remember Spaceballs, the animated series? Happy May 4th, everyone, and may the 4th be with you. And if you're watching this one day late, well, happy Revenge of the 5th. And happy Cinco de Mayo as well. Anyway, while I wouldn't call myself a die-hard Star Wars fan, I've still seen all the movies, played a fair amount of the games, and even dabbled a little in the external material. And all that dabbling has led me to a bunch of cartoons that are definitely fair game for this show. There's Star Wars Droids, released in 1985, which ran for one season. And if the intro is anything to go by, it seems like it's gonna be wacky, Hanna-Barbera-esque hijinks starring C-3PO and R2-D2. This sounds too amazing to pass up, and I'm definitely gonna check it out one day. Oh, R2-D2, where are you? You better have good manners. There's also Star Wars Detours, a CG animated Star Wars spoof series officially created by George Lucas himself in association with Robot Chicken creators Seth Green and Matthew Senrick. And it was never released. Seriously? You've got like 40 completed episodes of this thing just gathering dust somewhere? Why not just release it? Was it really that bad? I mean, I watched a few snippets and it seemed alright, I guess. Funnier than Robot Chicken, at least. Some might think it'd be weird to have a series like this in the official Star Wars catalog, but considering that catalog now contains Han Solo dancing to Jason Derulo songs, I see no reason why this would feel out of place. But today we're gonna look at something a little different. Not an official Star Wars property, but something inspired by it. It was funny. It was witty. It was timeless and hilarious. It has more quotable lines than any movie I've ever seen. It was a parody masterpiece. And then 21 years later, they made a cartoon spin-off that nobody remembers. Look, I'm gonna be upfront and blunt with you guys. Spaceballs is one of my favorite comedies of all time. It parodies the best elements of classic sci-fi blockbusters, and it leaves me in tears no matter how many times I watch it. And with that being said, the concept of a Spaceballs cartoon actually had a ton of potential, and I mean that. There is a literal galaxy of Star Wars material outside of the movies. Heck, I gave you a few examples of the more obscure ones earlier on. And if Spaceballs wanted to rip on other types of Star Wars media like comic books, video games, or heck, even their own version of the Clone Wars cartoon, which was added around the same time, I think they could have struck some real gold here. But instead of picking one main source material and using that as a springboard to parody other works in a similar genre, you know, like the original movie did, Mel Brooks and company decided to spread themselves incredibly thin and just parody everything under the sun. Doesn't matter if it's sci-fi, fantasy, spy thriller, comic book, or even reality TV. Every episode is going to be its own separate parody using the Spaceballs cast as stand-ins for certain characters, no matter how little sense it makes. My smarts is the biggest. Alright, let's try to be fair here and give the show an honest shot. And in order to do so, we need to know its history. Where is it?
Right here, sir.
Switch it on. The original Spaceballs film was released in 1987 and was co-written, produced, and directed by the legend that is Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks is what I consider the brewer of fine wine comedies, aka films that definitely do well in their first run, but as time goes by, they age beautifully and become huge cult classics for future generations to crack up at. You better believe I'm gonna be showing films like Silent Movie, Young Frankenstein, Blazing Saddles, and Robin Hood Men in Tights to my kids when they're old enough. The true art of parody will go down in the history books with this guy's face on the front cover. As far as Spaceballs specifically is concerned, it's not only an amazing film on the surface, but it also comes with some interesting behind-the-scenes stories. For instance, Daphne Zuniga, who played Princess Vespa, was originally quoted in saying that she found Brooks' films too crass and generally unfunny. But when she got the chance to actually work with the guy, she gained a new perspective on him, saying that while he is a total nut, he's also very perceptive and sensitive in a way that really makes actors respond. Just goes to show how professional he really was behind the scenes. But the funniest stories are the ones involving the Star Wars man himself, George Lucas. Believe it or not, despite the film's hilarious running gag about movies profiting off excessive merchandising, Spaceballs merch was never a thing. Yup, no t-shirts, comic books, lunchboxes, breakfast cereals, or flamethrowers for this franchise. He was allowed to spoof the source material in any way he chose on the big screen, but actual products like action figures and whatnot were completely off limits. Now keep in mind, this doesn't mean that Lucas was some kind of money-grubbing tyrant who didn't want his precious license to be stained. Quite the opposite, actually. Brooks let Lucas and his team handle the post-production of the movie, which came out to about $5 million in special effects. And when the movie was completed, Brooks got a really nice note from Lucas saying how much he loved the movie and how much he almost busted a gut while laughing. Say what you want about Lucas's movies, but at least the guy's got a good sense of humor. But in the end, is it really as good as I remember? Well, let's take a look at Spaceballs the movie and find out. I mean, god dang it, I'm not talking about the movie, I'm talking about the cartoon series. Sorry guys, I just love the film so much, sometimes I lose track of things. I can fix this though. Start the review over and prepare to fast forward. Are we good? Everyone's good? Alright, let's try this again. Spaceballs the animated series was created by original Spaceballs director Mel Brooks and writer Thomas Meehan. Brooks and Meehan had actually worked together many times in the past, including writing the script for the original Spaceballs, and they even shared the Tony Award for Best Book of a Musical because of the producers. Together they wrote the series pilot, which retold the events of the movie, with a few retcons and changes to have the setup of the cartoon make sense. As for the rest of the episodes, while Brooks didn't directly write any of them, he did at least supervise the overall writing process. Throw in the fact that he reprised his roles as both the Yogurt and President Scroob, and it's clear that he did play a major part in the show's overall production, meaning he likely approved of pretty much everything that was done here. Aside from Brooks, the show's voice cast is a mix of the original cast from the movie and a few newcomers. For the returning voices, we get Daphne Zuniga as Princess Vespa, Joan Rivers as Don Matrix, Rudy DeLuca as Vinny, and Dom DeLuise as Pizza the Hutt. In fact, voice acting for Pizza in 2009 was the last time that Dom recorded for anything before his death that same year. You can say what you want about this series, and I'm definitely going to, but the fact that the last thing Dom ever recorded was for Mel Brooks is kind of poetic in a way, since him and Mel had a really close relationship, and Dom played a role in almost all of Mel's movies. You will be missed, Mr. DeLuise. I'd give all the space bucks in the world to have you back with us. Unfortunately, Rick Moranis and Bill Pullman did not come back to play Hellman and Lone Star, which is a major shame. Instead, they got replaced with Reno Romano and D. Bradley Baker, respectively. Reno Romano has done a ton of voice work in the past, with roles like Peter Parker in Spider-Man Unlimited, Eduardo Rivera in Extreme Ghostbusters, and Tuxedo Mask from the Deke dub of Sailor Moon. As for D. Bradley Baker, well, if you've seen any cartoon from 1995 onward, odds are you've heard his voice somewhere. The production companies attached to this include Brooks Films, which should be obvious, MGM Studios, which really surprised me, Fantasy Prone Interactive, which did next to nothing aside from this series as far as I can see, and most prominently the Birdliner Film Company, whose only other credit besides this show is Da Boom Crew.
This ain't no game no more, baby. This is real.
I'm in danger. The show went through multiple delays until it was eventually released on Canada's Super Channel on June 4th, 2008, and eventually on G4 in America on November 21st. The premiere of the first 2 episodes was actually played after a TV airing of the original film, which was a clever idea to get people hyped and remind them of the movie they loved beforehand. But all it really did was just disappoint people when they eventually watched what preceded it. Spaceballs the Animated Series is a spin-off that begins right where the original movie left off. Except, no it isn't, because several plot points from the film are completely retconned and changed for the sake of the new story. For example, turns out Lone Star wasn't a bona fide prince after all, so Vespa can't marry him, putting them back in the rogue hero and damsel in distress roles they were in originally. I still have no idea why this was done. I mean, the Aladdin cartoon had Aladdin and Jasmine married like at the end of the film, but they were still able to go on fantastic adventures. It's wedlock, not deadlock, guys. You can still go out and do stuff. Also, despite the Spaceballs failing to steal the air from planet Druidia, their home planet is somehow still up and running with no reason why. Again, why bother with this change? The Spaceballs clearly have military power. Just say they conquered a brand new planet with its own air supply and then move the population to there. Or at least provide some kind of explanation. Did they steal the air from another planet? Did they plant trees to slowly restore their own atmosphere? Did they set up an air timeshare with Aloysius O'Hare and his Edna Mode head of hair? If so, when and where? I need an explanation and a reason to care.
Let it die, let it die.
Alright, I'm done with this joke. I swear. And then of course you have the most pointless changes of all, the constant renaming of things. Instead of the currency in this universe being Spacebucks, it's now Starbucks because... why? Instead of the upside and the downside of the Schwartz, it's now the bright side and the Schwartz side because...
why?
And instead of the home planet of our villains being called Planet Spaceball, it's now Planet Moron? And this one makes even less sense because Helmet actually refers to himself as a spaceball in the series.
Moron!
Actually, I'm a spaceball.
So why you do this? Why not just keep the names the same? There's literally no reason for it! As I mentioned before, there was a 2-part pilot on the DVD which retold the events of the original film and altered it to include these changes. So it's not like these came completely out of nowhere. But as I just showed you, you didn't even have to change anything. Keep Lone Star and Vespa married, put the Spaceballs on a different planet that they conquered, leave the names of things alone, and you're all set! Continuity doesn't have to be hung and the series can still make sense. But trust me, the retcons are the least of this series' problems. The number one issue with Spaceballs the animated series is that every single episode is its own separate parody. And every aspect of the show, from the story to the characters to the comedy, suffers because of this. The original Spaceballs was obviously meant to be a parody of Star Wars with other franchises mixed in. Fans will notice jokes based on the Force Choke, the scrolling text, the slow Empire ship reveal, the desert planet, and the classic I Am Your Father reveal, along with nods to things like Transformers, Star Trek, and Planet of the Apes. But at its core, Spaceballs is not just a cluster of sci-fi references. It's a coherent, well-written story with consistent characters and varied humor, full of jokes that even people who aren't familiar with the source material can laugh at. You don't need to understand Star Wars to get a kick out of scenes like When Will Then Be Now or I'm Surrounded by A-Holes. Not a fan of easy jokes like puns or innuendos? There are plenty of genuinely clever physical and dialogue-based gags to give you a laugh, meaning there's something for everyone. Heck, some of the reference-based gags are still hilarious even if you don't get the reference. I can say from experience that I watched that diner scene with the vaudeville dancing chest burster, knowing nothing about Ridley Scott's Alien or Michigan J. Frog, and I still thought it was hilarious because it was so silly and unexpected. Spaceballs is not just a good parody, but a genuinely well-written and funny movie. But Spaceballs the animated series is the complete opposite, consisting of extremely sloppy writing, randomly changing rules, a cast of dress-up dolls that can barely be considered characters anymore, and humor which falls into one of two categories: surface-level reference or cheap, immature gag. And to explain what I mean, let's start with the basics. When you make a cartoon show with a set cast of characters and a set universe, you want to make sure those things stay consistent across the series, right? If viewers like what they see after a few episodes, they'll want to tune in and see more of the same. Simple to grasp, everyone gets it. Well, Spaceballs throws those basic guidelines straight out the window and constantly reshapes the characters and setting just to fit whatever they're parodying that week. And the excuses for why the characters are acting that way are either really stupid or completely non-existent. In Spaceballs of the Caribbean, for example, why is Barf dressed up like Jack Sparrow? Because him and Lone Star are gonna pirate a ship. So he wanted to dress and act like a pirate. Okay. And then the rest of them dress and act like pirates because it's fun, I guess? In the Scrubinator, which is their Terminator parody, they try to reference the scene where the Terminator is naked before getting his clothes. And the reason Helmet and Scroob are naked when they first arrive is because helmet flipped the naked switch. Yup, that's literally the reason they give us. The DeLorean has a naked switch because...
Well, just because.
But then you get the changes that have no explanation at all other than it fits the parody. Why did the genre shift from sci-fi to high fantasy? Because it fits the parody. Why is Barf dressed up like Bilbo Baggins with no explanation or mention? Because it fits the parody. Why does Vespa suddenly know how to do magic, which is never brought up again before or after? Because it fits the parody. Why does Yogurt start growing tentacles on his face after his gallbladder is removed? Because it fits the parody. Why are Scroob helmets suddenly robots, which has never been established or hinted at in the history of ever? Because it fits the parody. This whole thing makes you wonder why they even bothered using the Spaceballs cast in the first place. If all they're gonna do is change their behavior, personalities, and even origins in every episode just to fit with a certain parody, then why not just make Mel Brooks's hilarity parody power half hour, where all the episodes are just a separate parody with separate characters? Seems like a better idea than this. And if you thought the characters were confusing, I can't even begin to understand how the Schwartz works anymore. Say what you want about Disney making the Force confusing in their trilogy, but it is nothing compared to this. In the movie, the Schwartz was pretty much the same as the Force, an omnipresent entity that existed all throughout the galaxy that pretty much anyone could tap into if they trained hard enough. It could also act as a makeshift lightsaber or blaster at the user's command. Schwartz masters tended to wear rings to prove their mastery, but they didn't need them to use it, as shown with Lone Star later in the film. In this show, the Schwartz is just whatever the writers want it to be. It apparently allows you to go inside of video games and also turns your TV into a portal to the video game realm. Because of course it does, that makes too much sense. You can also time travel with the Schwartz if you spell it out while cheerleading. So why did Scroob and Helmet need to steal the DeLorean? Couldn't they just use the Schwartz to time travel? Instead of just lightsabers and laser beams, the Schwartz now comes with Green Lantern powers, which lets you create anything you want out of energy. Alright. Also, a Schwartz ring is apparently all you need now to become a Schwartz master, despite the ring being a completely useless trinket in the original movie that they found in a Cracker Jack box? Are you confused yet? Well, it gets worse. Instead of the Schwartz being an omnipresent force in the universe that anyone can tap into, apparently Yogurt's Schwartz powers comes from his gallbladder? And if you remove it, he loses his Schwartz? Plus, in the same episode, it's revealed that he can just beam more Schwartz into Lone Star if he ever needs a power boost? So, Schwartz Masters are like batteries now that need to be charged? And if that wasn't bad enough, in the very next episode, Yogurt says that Lone Star can use the Schwartz for this adventure because it's in the shop. What do you mean it's in the shop? How can an all-powerful force in the galaxy be in the shop? What happened to Schwartz being stored in your non-vital organs? What is going on? Similar to the characters, the status and mythos of the Schwartz is constantly changed just to fit the parody they're trying to make. So again, why even bother with Spaceballs? On top of everything, they don't just change old characters, but add brand new characters on a whim for no other reason than because those types of characters were in the movie they're spoofing. Okay, we're doing a Harry Potter spoof. Lone Star has his own version of Hedwig now. Alright, we're gonna spoof Jurassic Park. We gotta have 2 anonymous lawyers and a precocious little girl join them on their journey. And yes, that's actually what the characters refer to them as. Anonymous lawyers and precocious girl. Because if we admit that the reference is blatant, that automatically makes it funny. And while on the topic of funny, let's talk about the comedy. The comedy is the kind of thing you expect to be the real selling point of any Mel Brooks production. Honestly, I could overlook the sloppy writing and storytelling if the episodes were at least funny. And on the whole, they're really, really not. Most of the parody jokes just consist of bare bones puns based on the characters' names and movie titles. Like the episodes will be named Lord of the Onion Rings, Watch Jurassic Park, Druidian Idol, Fish Finger, and Harry Potter and the Gopher of Fire. Gee, how creative. Even worse, the characters will just randomly be given code names like Lone Staragorn, Barf Baggins, Bad Job, and 00 Sven. Look, speaking as a lover of well-crafted puns, even I can say this is pathetic. When Mel Brooks used puns in his original movies, they had proper timing, execution, and delivery from his actors, which made them hilarious. But just taking a list of characters' names and changing them slightly, on its own, it's just unfunny, and the bare minimum of what you can call a parody. If you want to parody a character, you gotta go all the way. When you look at Dark Helmet in the original film, the fact that his name was a pun was not the whole joke. There was plenty more to him. He was a short, pathetic, angry man baby with no intimidating presence, whereas in the Star Wars movies, tension immediately rose whenever Darth Vader was on screen. And even if you don't know who Darth Vader is, the mere fact that this guy is in such a position of power is a joke in and of itself. Like, this is seriously the best military leader that Planet Spaceballs could offer? Wow, their planet really is screwed. But in this series? Well, I think this clip sums it up better than I ever could.
That's like if I took the name Steven Spielberg and called him Steven Gielberg. Like, that's not funny. That's kindergarten level. No, kindergarten students don't find that funny. Aliens don't find that funny.
And don't even get me started on some of the plots. It's lazy enough to just slightly change a popular name or title, but how about straight up copy and pasting the plot lines and set pieces from those movies just with one tiny alteration? Harry Potter, for example, is just Harry Potter with golf. So we get stuff like Hole 9 3/4, the Great Hall just with golf clubs instead of candles, and Lone Star with a golf ball lodged in his head instead of a scar. And what about Lord of the Onion Rings, where the One Ring is now an onion ring, Mount Doom is a giant deep fryer, and the Eye of Sauron is now a giant nose of Sauron. Guys, this is what grade schoolers come up with as parodies, not professional comedy legends. That would be like if I made a parody of The Wizard of Oz and just called it The Wizard of Schnoz. Dorothy has terrible allergies and needs to make it home to Kansas before she dies of an allergy attack. On the way, she encounters people and things that irritate her nose even more, like a moldy scarecrow full of hay, an old tin man covered in dust, a cat that keeps shedding, and fields of poppies that let off too much pollen. Meanwhile, the wicked pharmacist of the West is trying to sell her cheap, ineffective allergy medication for extremely unfair prices. See, I threw that together in 5 minutes, and even that's more funny than this. And when the humor isn't centered around lame parody puns and plots, the fruit is hanging even lower with an excess of overly crude, cheap, and sometimes really disrespectful jokes. All your favorites are here. We've got constant sexual innuendos, racist humor, and of course there's the always popular and prevalent gross out humor, complete with one episode which has minutes upon minutes of people just barfing all over everything and everyone. In fact, Barf himself has gone from half man, half dog in the movie to half fat joke, half fart joke in the series. And I'm not even exaggerating. Now, I know that comedy is subjective, and admittedly, I don't have a problem with any of these kinds of jokes in theory. Heck, Mel Brooks has at least one of these per movie, and they're usually always funny. But the big difference is that he used them minimally to good effect. Meanwhile, the animated series stuffs so many of these kinds of jokes into every single episode that it stops being funny after the 700th time. Not to mention there's no witty writing or humor to balance out the more crass stuff, so it feels more like a low-tier Family Guy episode than anything Brooks put out in his prime. Even the fourth wall humor is super lazy, and I love fourth wall humor when it's done well. Most of these jokes just involve the characters being aware that they're in a TV show and making really generic jabs at that fact. Saying things like, well, we had to have some way to move the plot along, or, oh man, I'm tired, I could use a commercial break. Nothing clever or subtle like accidentally slashing the cameraman, or the camera itself knocking Helmet over, or using the cassette of the actual movie to track the protagonist before the movie's even finished. Just some lazy meta gags that make Deadpool want to listen to Take On Me again. Speaking of that cassette scene, what happens when Spaceballs the animated series runs out of material to spoof? Well, I guess they could always just reuse jokes from the original movie. Yup, we actually get animated rehashes of When Will Then Be Now and I'm Surrounded by A-Holes, just with less funny delivery and horrid visuals. So literally just leeching off the original movie and sucking out all the freshness and comedy. I do have to give credit though, occasionally there will be a clever gag that does make me laugh.
Yoga teaches typing A through E.
Why only A through E?
Show business always leave them wanting more.
I just really wish this was the norm instead of the exception. Then maybe I could have given the show an honest recommendation. You guys know I have way more fun building things up than tearing them down, but sometimes that's gotta be done. Okay, what about music? Brooks himself is a great composer. He's written tons of songs for his films and their theater adaptations, so maybe we'll get something easy on the ears at least. Let's start with the theme song, how's that?
Run for shelter, helter skelter, they are in command. Spaceballs.
And it's not great. It's trying way too hard to sound grand and epic, building up the Spaceballs as some kind of deadly galaxy-destroying threat, when in reality the Spaceballs are less dangerous than a litter of puppies coming after you for kisses. Also, maybe I'm alone here, but does the singing sound very off to anyone else? I don't know if they're trying to invoke the feeling of a grand chorus like something out of Duel of the Fates, but it sounds way too sharp and robotic, like a Buzz Lightyear running out of batteries or something.
Say, what's that button do? I'll show you.
Run for shelter, helter skelter, they are
If it were up to me, I would just use the Spaceballs theme from the movie as the theme song. Not only because it's more cheesy and lighthearted like the movie itself, but it's a complete and total bop. Alright, do we at least get some good songs within the episodes? I mean, they did an American Idol parody. Surely there's something worth salvaging there, right? Sadly, no. We only get 2 original songs, neither of which is funny or even sung that well. Vespa's song is just a bland love song without any real hook or passion behind the lyrics, so not really worth remembering. I guess Barf's song Eat to Love, Love to Eat is at least decent, but there are way better love songs about food out there. Heck, VeggieTales gave us his cheeseburger back in 1998, and it's infinitely better than this. Yes, VeggieTales is timeless and awesome, come at me. Also, shame on you, Druidian Idol! Shame on you for your terrible parody of Karma Chameleon.
Daddy, 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 dandelion, no, you've got to go.
How dare you hurt my baby? The only audio in this show I can give some real credit to is the voice acting. It's not spectacular, but some of the actors definitely do what they can. Mel does his best to breathe life back into President Scroob and Yogurt, and while he clearly does sound very tired in his old age, I gotta give him credit for trying his best. The only times it can get kind of awkward is when Yogurt and Scroob have lines right next to each other, and you can hear 2 very similar sounding voices, but other than that, I think he does a good job. Joan Rivers may not have many funny lines, but she does the best with what she was given, and she does seem to be having a good time. Rino Romano actually makes a pretty good Lone Star. He's no Bill Pullman, but he still has that dry, laid-back, low-key delivery you'd expect from a rogue like Lone Star, and I think it works well. As for Barf, the late John Candy obviously couldn't come back to reprise his role, so they went with Tino Insana. And while he's probably one of the best actors in the show and definitely has a Barf-like vibe to his voice, I'm not gonna lie, it's really hard to not hear Pig from back at the barnyard. Every time Barf opens his mouth, I keep thinking he's gonna interrupt the plot with a viewer mail or something. Helmet is unfortunately in a similar vein. D. Bradley Baker is also incredibly talented and delivers his lines effectively, but more often than not, Helmet just sounds like a background fish from SpongeBob.
Oh, what happened? Where am I? Hey man, that's my hat. Give it back.
But honestly, that's just a me problem, since I've probably seen more cartoons than anyone my age should have, so I don't want to undermine either one of their performances. The voice acting isn't anything groundbreaking, but it does get the job done, and I gotta give the cast some credit. Alright, the writing's awful, the comedy's awful, the sound is decent but doesn't really save the whole thing. Guess that means the visuals and animation are our only hope to save the galaxy.
I'm going to die.
Yeah, if you couldn't tell already from the clips I've shown, the visuals are atrocious. Everything from the character designs to the animation comes off as either painfully generic or terrifying. The characters either look like lifeless plastic Barbie dolls or hideous monsters. I mean, the first time I saw Commanderette Zircon, she looked like a wrinkled parsnip with a wig on top. And she's apparently supposed to be attractive to people like Scroob and Lone Star? Sure, if you say so. Colonel Sanders only shows up once in the series, and they gave him a gigantic nose. Why though? Because big nose equals funny? No, it just makes him look really dumb. Helmet looks like a bobblehead that constantly has to take a nap. And when he does his evil laugh... Yeah, kill him with fire! The actual animation is just your typical cheap Flash garbage, where characters move more like paper dolls than living human beings. Movements are jerky and awkward, limbs will snap into certain positions without moving fluidly, and lip syncing is either incredibly sloppy or sometimes just not even trying. I know when you animate in Flash you use things called puppets, but that doesn't mean they have to move like actual puppets, guys. Sometimes the writing and animation completely clash with each other, leading to weird lines like this.
I don't like cities. I'd rather go with a little green guy.
Guys, Yogurt is yellow. Technically he's gold if you want to go by the film's logic, but who in the world looked at this design and came to the conclusion that he's a little green man? What, because his cloak is green? Just because I wear a blue shirt, that doesn't make me a blue man. I'm blue. And the animation mistakes. Oh boy. I'm not going to go over all of them, but here's a little highlight reel of my favorites. In the first scene of the first episode, we see Helmet's sleeve overlapping his glove. Helmet's glasses turn into monocles for one scene, the dork army just jump into frame instead of sliding into it, Barf yells in panic with a smile on his face.
Lone Star, no!
Really janky excuses for climbing animation. Lone Star's fist randomly changes positions between frames, and Barf's arm moves before his sleeve does. The mailman talks without moving his mouth. And probably worst of all, the background literally changes mid-scene in this shot. Like, how on earth do you miss that? I deeply apologize for going into such exhaustive detail on every single aspect, but the fact that I have so much to talk about truly is a testament to just how wrong everything in this show truly is.
It's not easy being chosen, or green for that matter.
You're yellow! Gah! Spaceballs the animated series eventually died out after only one season, and ended its run on March 1st, 2009. It was pretty much lost to the sands of time, and even if you comb the desert, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who ever talks about it. A DVD of the single season does exist if you really want to check this out, but it's pretty difficult to get a hold of, and honestly, it's not worth the search or the money. As far as future Spaceballs material is concerned, nothing new has really surfaced yet. The concept of a Spaceballs sequel was tossed around for years. Rick Moranis admitted that him and Brooks discussed plans for Spaceballs 3, The Search for Spaceballs 2, which already sounds like a hilarious idea. And while the specifics of why it fell through are not clear, it's obvious that Mel's specifications for a sequel just weren't working for Rick. Then in 2015, Mel Brooks showed interest in a sequel again with Spaceballs 2, The Search for More Money, which was actually a joke in the movie. There wasn't much word about it after that, though we did get this blurb from an interview with Bill Pullman, who played Lone Star.
It's up to Mel.
I'm gonna give him a call.
Yeah. Ask him if he's got too much money. That's why he doesn't do it.
Honestly, seeing a Spaceballs sequel in Mel's classic style would definitely be a treat, especially with so much new material to mock nowadays. But with the guy turning 94 in a few months and most of the cast going their own separate ways, I think it might be too late for such a thing to come out. Ah well, I guess we'll always have the original to marvel at, and it'll live on in our hearts as a true classic of comedy. So, should Spaceballs the animated series be remembered? No! As someone who's followed the man's work for years, I can say with all confidence that this does not feel like a Mel Brooks creation. It feels like a parody of a Mel Brooks creation. They took the kinds of jokes that Mel would use smartly and minimally in his original films and just plastered them all over every episode, desperate for a laugh. They took popular big-budget movies that Mel would often spoof and put in the bare minimum effort to parody them, never going the extra mile to truly make an effective satire. But the absolute worst thing about this show, and the primary ingredient that is clearly not here, is respect for the original creators. What turns a good parody into an amazing one is love, knowledge, and respect for the source material. This is something that Brooks always had in his movies, and it's the thing that makes them age beautifully, even if the comedy can get a little dated. Remember how I said that George Lucas loves Spaceballs? Yeah, he loves Spaceballs because Mel didn't just make cheap, low-tier jabs at Lucas's expense. He took the time to make a mocking but loving tribute to his work, and it was received as such. Spaceballs the animated series just doesn't have that air of admiration and effort that Brooks' other works had. I mean, come on, randomly killing beloved characters like Doc Brown, Jar Jar Binks, and Paperboy, and treating that on its own like a joke? That's something Disaster Movie or Drawn Together would do, and Mel is leagues above those movies when he tries his hardest. I'll always be a fan of Mel Brooks. In fact, I plan to do a Mel month one day where I look at each of his movies individually. But Spaceballs the animated series is something best left in the past, along with some of his lesser works. In fact, I'll finish this review off with a little quote from Helmet, which pretty much sums up my general thoughts.
I've watched every episode of every season and I've never found it entertaining.